And welcome back to the show. The Our Money campaign is an issue-based advocacy campaign seeking to mainstream the academy insights of modern monetary theory to solve some of our nation's greatest social and economic challenges. The organization seeks to build a diverse grassroots bipartisan movement endeavoring to address things as disparities in employment, wages, healthcare, education, and household debt. Joining us now is the founder of Our Money, Dr. Delman Coates, and we thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Coates.
Thank you so much, Daren. I'm so honored to be on with you today.
Well, listen, it's important that you are with us because this is a conversation that needs to be had. And when we talk about financial literacy, important, right? And really making the way. So give us a little bit about your organization and the work that you do.
Well, thank you. Well, the Our Money campaign seeks to build public support for a set of broad-based federal spending policies that are designed to address the inequities, and the disparities that we see in the country around employment, healthcare, public education. Those three policies are federal job guarantee, federal funding of public education, and free public healthcare. The sort of twist to the Our Money campaign is we seek to build public support for what I regard as the biggest, baddest, boldest public policy priorities right now, but we seek to do it through the funding mechanism informed by modern monetary theory. Now, modern monetary theory, or MMT for short, Daren, is a school of economics that has been growing in the academy for the last 30, 35 years and has been gaining a great deal of traction in the financial press and in Congress. Now, you may be wondering, you and your listeners may be wondering, well, what's the big deal about modern monetary theory? Well, MMT changes the way we tend to think about how are we going to pay for these big public priorities. I mean, you know that the foundational question of public finance as it relates to public policies is where's the money going to come from? Now, most policymakers and conventional economists assume that the federal government's ability to spend is capped or limited by how much revenue that it brings in. We sort of call it the household model of economics. Like, think about it, your business or your home needs a source of revenue first in order to spend, and it's deemed financially irresponsible to spend more than you bring in revenue.
Right.
Well, most mainstream economists, liberal, conservative, left, right, and their economic advisors tend to assume that the federal government's budget works like a household that needs revenue first in order to spend. And most often that revenue is thought of in terms of coming from tax revenue. So what mainstream economists tend to do is they sort of calculate how much revenue is coming in, and they assume that the federal government's ability to spend on public education, healthcare, job creation, the environment, state and local infrastructure is capped by tax revenue. Well, MMT says, and there are a range of economists who are on our advisory council. If you go to our website, ourmoneyus.org, our economists help us to understand that the federal government does not operate like a household. It is the currency issuer, not the currency user, right?
Mm-hmm.
As homeowners, as individuals, we use currency, but the federal government creates what we use as money. That means its ability to spend on the things that we so desperately need is not capped by revenue. And just think, Daren, about how we funded the stimulus over the last 15 months. We spent an unprecedented amount of money in the last 15 months on stimulus in response to COVID. $5 trillion. There's even proposals for another $1 to $2 trillion. Bezos wasn't taxed. Jay-Z, Beyonce, people making over $400,000 weren't taxed to fund that federal spending. The federal government merely created the money to fund that national priority.
Yeah.
So what MMT says is that the cap for spending, responsible spending by the federal government, is not revenue, but inflation. And as long as we don't exceed the inflation target, the federal government has the capacity to create all of the money we need to address our greatest social and economic challenges.
talking about the civil rights movement, because that was huge, right? And we know that there is unfinished work that's done in the civil rights movement in terms of, listen, when it comes to finances, economic agenda, some things we left on the table, and you want to address that unfinished policy.
Well, many people today are hitting the streets all across America in response to the range of social, racial, and economic issues we're facing today. We're trying to continue that legacy. But what many people fail to realize, as you just mentioned, Daren, is that economic justice is the unfinished work of the civil rights movement. And that when Dr. King, when his life was taken from him prematurely, he was focused on the importance of connecting the social realities of the country to issues of economic inequality. Think about the March on Washington. The full name of the march was the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. Some kind of way the jobs and freedom part of the march has kind of gotten lost to history. But the reason Dr. King and other leaders led 250,000 people to the mall in Washington was to fight for a policy solution called a federal job guarantee. The goal was to eliminate involuntary unemployment in America. Because as long as people do not have economic security, as long as we manage the economy on the backs of the unemployed, then people will not have the economic wherewithal to provide for themselves, to have stable communities and have a stable society. Now, what do I mean balance the economy on the backs of the unemployed? Most people, Daren, don't realize that the way we do monetary policy in America assumes that we will always have 4 to 5% unemployment nationally, even in a good economy. Did you hear that? 4 to 5% of the American people will always be unemployed, even in a good economy. That means that in Black and brown communities and poor communities, we're always going to have double-digit unemployment because we leave the issue of employment up to the private sector. A federal job guarantee says that people deserve a right to a dignified job at a livable wage. And so a federal job guarantee is a public option for jobs so that we can eliminate the scourge of unemployment, the unnecessary scourge of unemployment in our society by providing dignified employment for every American that wants one. And it's funded through the mechanism of not having to take from one area of the budget to give it to another. It's not about taxing the rich or people who make over a certain amount of money. It's about the federal government harnessing the power of money creation to address this very important critical need.
You're talking about an interesting concept, though. You're talking about not taking from one to give to the other. I mean, that's huge.
Yes, MMT is so critically and powerful, and it's important for those of us who are concerned about economic justice, because I hear all the time, even progressives use this idea that the federal government has to defund in order to fund, that we have to take money from the military budget in order to fund community centers and public education and healthcare, that we have to take money and obtain money from the rich and the wealthy in order to fund other public priorities. Now, MMT is clear that there is a role for taxation for the federal government, but the federal government, which we distinguish from state and local governments, does not have to tax in order to spend. When we go to war, Daren, God forbid if we had to go to war tomorrow, no member of Congress would say, hold on, we can't spend this until we figure out where the money is going to come from before we go to war. No, we harness the power of money creation, and we do it through the monetary fiscal policy mechanism called deficit spending. Deficit spending is actually good for the American people because when the federal, that leaves more surplus in the pockets of the American people. That's what the stimulus was all about. And so we should be pushing for more responsible net public money creation, which is deficit spending, to address disparities in public education. Just imagine right now, Daren, if rather than funding public education 90% through state and local tax dollars, we funded public education fully, completely, gave teachers raises, upgraded the infrastructure, facilities, and campuses of all of our schools and funded it through federal spending, the same way we fund going to war. If we can harness the power of money creation to drop bombs in foreign lands and to shoot bullets in foreign lands against people of color, we can harness that same power for books and school buildings for our children and our young people and our communities right here at home.
Well, the biggest challenge that many people in New York City are talking about is that of public education, because when you look at public education the way that it is right now, it seems as though teachers are spending more money on their own to buy supplies. You've got classrooms that are overcrowded, and you've got a lack of necessary resources. You got programs being cut, music, art, sports, these things and the like. Public education definitely taking a hit, but under your way, public education can definitely see a significant turnaround.
It's a national problem. And the tragedy is it's totally unnecessary. You may wonder, if the federal government has the power to create money for the things that we need, why aren't we doing it? Well, the reason that we aren't doing it is because the financial sector benefits when state and local governments, when individuals rely on money created through private bank lending rather than public spending. So the financial sector is incentivized to have the public, to have society relying on bank credit when your state or your city has to float or issue bonds to fund school construction, to build roads and bridges, when we have to take out credit cards to just get by. And so the financial sector is incentivized by having an economy that relies on bank credit rather than an economy that relies on public spending. We could solve the crisis today in New York, in public education, in healthcare, in unemployment, in the economy, to address our greatest existential threat right now, and that's climate change and our environmental crisis. We can solve all of our greatest challenges by changing the way we think about money. We never have a problem harnessing the power of the public purse to bail out banks, to bail out corporations, to go to war. We need to harness that same power to address the war in education, the war in healthcare, because if we don't, our families are at risk, our communities are at risk. We will continue to force people into jails when we don't guarantee jobs. And the only way to solve this is to harness the power of the public purse. We do not have a money crisis. Money is the one thing that is not scarce in society. And as long as we don't exceed the threshold of inflation, the federal government can address all of our state and local priorities by harnessing the power of the public purse.
You make it sound so easy. So the question is, why is it so hard to do?
Well, as I mentioned, I think it's important for people to understand that historically, the historic tension in nations has been around who is going to create the money. Will it be private interest or will it be public interest? And private interests have always been successful in delegitimizing the role of the public sector. Think about how people think about public education, public health care. So the private sector has historically won the battle in delegitimizing the role of the public sector by hiding behind dog whistles like, oh, that's socialism. Oh, you guys are anti-capitalism. You guys are anti-individual industry. And so we have to change the way we think about and understand money. And I'm really excited today. Just a few weeks ago, the chair of the House Budget Committee, Chairman John Yarmouth, had an interview on C-SPAN. I encourage your listeners to look it up, in which he talked about the importance of the economic framework of modern monetary theory, changing the way we think about the capacity of the federal government to spend money on the things that we need. And right now, we're locked into this household model that assumes that the federal government's ability to spend is capped by revenue. It is the common sense way of thinking about a budget, but modern monetary theory helps us to understand that the federal government is not like a household. It creates the money. It doesn't use money. And so therefore, it has a much broader capacity to spend money on the things that we desperately need today.
So talk to us a little bit about what you're working on right now. Presently, I know that you're got your feet and your hands, should say hands in a whole lot of irons, but talk to us about what you're working on now.
The one policy solution that we're going around the country educating people about is a federal job guarantee. On February the 17th, Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley presented a federal job guarantee resolution. The goal of the federal job guarantee, as I said before, is to address the unnecessary circumstance of there being unemployment in America. We're trying to raise awareness with activists, civil rights, and faith leaders about continuing this unfinished work of Dr. King. Coretta Scott King, Daren, led 1.2 million people in rallies and marches in the 70s in support of a federal job guarantee. The late Vernon Jordan advocated for a federal job guarantee as a part of his leadership with the National Urban League. We have got to have advocates and people on the ground demanding that their members of Congress support a federal job guarantee. It is the only way we're going to strengthen our families, make sure that policymakers don't continue to balance the economy on the backs of the unemployed. What happens right now whenever unemployment starts to dip, in their minds, too low? Once it starts to get below 4% or 3.5%, they start thinking about other measures to cool off the economy, so they say, by perhaps raising interest rates, all designed to give us more unemployment, because it's based on an outdated model that assumes that if we have true full employment in America, that'll cause inflation. It has been discredited, and we can no longer accept an economy where we balance the economy on the backs of those who are unable to find a job. And so we're pushing for a federal job guarantee, and we're pushing for hearings in Congress that call for the budget committees in the House and the Senate to clarify the full extent of the federal government's spending capacity. And we're calling on the House Finance Committee and the Senate Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs committees to reassess the unfounded connection between unemployment and inflation so that we can have a true full employment economy.
Talk to me about that, because when you talk about unemployment and inflation, yes, the two are linked to be going hand in hand, but you see it how?
It's the greatest myth in economics right now that has been discredited. It's called the NAIRU, or the natural rate of unemployment. In the past, there was this curve called the Phillips curve, which assumed that if too many people have a job, that if unemployment gets too low, then that will necessarily trigger inflation. It's why the Federal Reserve had its dual mandate, and it was the watered down compromise of Coretta Scott King and others in the 70s who were pushing for full employment. They said, well, we will have full employment, but we'll balance it with price stability. This is a thoroughly discredited premise. We've had chairmen of the Fed, like Chairman Jerome Powell, that have talked about we really need to reassess this model, this assumption. But the Fed right now does not have the tools to get us to full employment. The answer to get us to full employment is through fiscal policy, and that can only come from members of Congress passing legislation that guarantees full employment. And here's why a federal job guarantee is so helpful and critical, Daren. A federal job guarantee shifts our thinking from stimulus to automatic stabilizers. What do I mean by that? Well, right now, we've had $5+ trillion in stimulus spending. But what happens when that stimulus spending works its way through the economy and works its way through people's pockets? We then have to go back to Congress and beg for more stimulus money. That's what we're doing right now.
Right.
A federal job guarantee is far superior when it comes to public spending because it shifts from stimulus to automatic stabilizers. The spending for it is guaranteed. It's automatic, a lot like unemployment benefits, which frees us from the House or who's leading the Senate. Why should our needs, the needs of the American people to provide for their families, be held hostage to who's leading the Senate or who's leading the House? A federal job guarantee is a far superior way of doing public spending in a way that provides us economic security and stability.
So when we talk about really looking at unemployment right now, we know that unemployment is really huge. And in New York City, we know that it's a real crisis right now. Federal spending, from your perspective, definitely can help in terms of dealing with the unemployment crisis, correct? And
Yes, sir.
as we're talking about unemployment and shifting that money, what you're saying is a lot of public participation, a lot of public awareness, and that's what our show's about, right? How to get some people civically engaged and really raising their voice. You're saying making sure that you're letting other people know, or your congressional leaders, senators, that there needs to be a shift.
The problems that you face in New York City, Westchester County, Rockland County, Nassau County, the problems that we face at the state and local level emanate from the lack of leadership that's happening at the national level. A federal job guarantee helps address the state and local unemployment situation, because while it's federally funded, it's administered at the state and local level. Look, you in the state of New York and in your cities, you know the needs that you have as it relates to roads and bridges that need to be rebuilt, the funding that needs to go towards public education, the hospitals that need to be remodeled and redesigned, the community centers that need to be provided, the programs that you need. Your city or your county or your state is always going to be capped by how much revenue it can bring in. It's going to put that tax burden on individuals. The federal government does not have that constraint. It does not have that revenue constraint. So a federal job guarantee, while it is federally funded, but administered at the state and local level to address state and local priorities, to provide a dignified job for every American who wants one, to address the issues that you have in your community. It is a far superior way of addressing local and state priorities than thinking about how can we figure out how to do the best that we can with the little bit of tax revenue that we have at the state and local level.
Delman, let me ask this question here. How does this delve into healthcare? Can healthcare be affected by this?
There's no doubt about it. Our campaign is supporting federal funding of healthcare. Many of you may remember during the Democratic presidential debates that whenever the healthcare debate came up, the candidates on the stage debated, where's the money gonna come from? We have snippets of the back and forth about one plan being too expensive, then another plan being regarded as acceptable because it's more affordable. Well, here's the thing about modern monetary theory. The federal government can fund them all, right? The federal government can provide free public health care and can allow people to keep their individual or private health insurance if they desire, because the federal government has the capacity to build new hospitals in every community, to make sure that people should not die, Daren. People should not become bankrupt because of the sin of becoming sick. This is a tragedy in America. We are siphoning the wealth from the pockets. We talk about wealth creation and the need to sort of build wealth. Well, when people are unable to maintain their resources because they're paying more for prescription medications, for surgeries and procedures, because their local and state tax burden is so high, it is preventing us from developing the kind of wealth that we want to have. So modern monetary theory has a range of benefits that would benefit the communities that we serve and address the issues that we face today, issues that are the legacies of our history of slavery and Jim Crow segregation. And if we want to address these issues, if we want to have true reparative economic justice, it must come through the prism of understanding modern monetary theory. MMT is not an alternative economic system. It is merely a description of how our economy works right now. And if Donald Trump, if the Republicans can use MMT to give $2 trillion in tax cuts to the rich and say nothing about deficits or the federal debt, we need to harness that face today to address the issues in our communities and that the issues that our people are facing today. It has truly changed my understanding of what's possible if we're going to make our world and our society a more equitable place. It is by understanding modern monetary theory. I want to give all of your listeners a book to read. If you have not read the book, The Deficit Myth, it is written by economist Stephanie Kelton. It came out in June of 2028. Get The Deficit Myth. It'll really change your understanding of the fiscal policy capacity of the federal government. It'll give you a basic outline of modern monetary theory. It's written in a way that's accessible to non-specialists in the field. And I also want to encourage you to get two other books, if I can give them to you, Daren.
Yep.
The first is The Case for a Federal Job Guarantee by economist Pavlina Cherneva, The Case for a Federal Job Guarantee. And the third is Racial Taxation by scholar Camille Walsh. It helps us to understand that this whole dog whistle of relying on taxpayer dollars and this focus on taxes to fund spending is really a legacy of the country's history of racism against funding priorities that benefit the poor and Black and brown people in the country. We've got to shift, even progressives, we got to shift from that model so we can have a better society.
Dr. Delman Coates, we got to leave it there, but thank you so much. A lot of helpful information. Dr. Delman Coates, founder of Our Money, thank you for joining us here on the Social Justice Forums.
Thank you so much. Go to ourmoneyus.org.
All righty. And with that, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be back with more show right after these messages.